Hello, welcome everybody. While we wait for some more people to join us, why don't you tell us exactly where in the world you're joining us from? You can also add into the chat what sector you're joining us from, what it looks like outside your window, what you're doing today. Let us know exactly where you're from, please. We're just going to give a few minutes for people to join. We'll get started at about 3 minutes past. Hello from Mauritius, Kazakhstan, Colombia, Rome, welcome, Ghana. It's good to see such a wide range of people. Nairobi, London, Mexico, snow in Vermont. Must be pretty. Massachusetts too. It's dark already in Cambridge. Predictable. Okay. Hello from Peru. All right. I think we are going to get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. Hello and welcome to this crucial webinar on the Global Knowledge Support Service for Biodiversity. My name is Santuri Naidu, and I'm a Program Officer in Policy Innovation at UNEP-WCMC, and I lead the development of this knowledge service. And I'm so thrilled to see so many passionate individuals joining us from across the globe today. Biodiversity, it's a living fabric of life on Earth, and sustaining it has never been more important. As we all know, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework package of decisions was adopted in 2022. And this sets an ambitious and vital roadmap to address the biodiversity crisis that puts us on a pathway towards living in harmony with nature. But ambitious goals and targets require robust knowledge and support to inform decision-making. And that is what we hope that this knowledge service will do for you. UNEP-WCMC has engaged with CBD parties worldwide. And through extensive consultations, we dove deep into your needs and challenges on monitoring the implementation of the KMGBF. Your insights have been invaluable in shaping this service. And today we are incredibly excited to share this progress with you. For those of you that attended our side event at the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the CBD, we are sharing our presentation from that side event to a wider audience via this webinar today. Over the next hour, we'll delve into some of the specifics of the online element of the knowledge service, how it will function, and most importantly, how you can benefit from it. This is your opportunity to ask questions, share your perspectives, and help us further shape this vital resource. So welcome again, and let's get started. First up, we have Mel Hanley, Events Coordinator at UNEP-WCMC, to take you through some housekeeping. Mel, on to you.
Hi everyone. Just to let you know that this webinar will be recorded. Please let me know if you have any problems with this. Your microphone and camera will be off during the session. If you'd like to ask questions, please put your comments and questions in the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. And if you have any technical issues, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. On to our first speaker, Natasha Ali. Natasha is the interim head of policy at UNEP-WCMC. She leads UNEP-WCMC's policy team. In a technical capacity, Natasha coordinates a portfolio of projects about indicators that are used for tracking progress towards national and global goals, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Sustainable Development Goals. She has a long history of international policy experience through her work with the UK government, IUCN, and the private sector. Natasha, take it away.
Thanks so much, Centauri, and hello everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. Wanted to give you, as Centauri said, a quick update on where we've got to with the Global Knowledge Support Service, and apologies to those of you that have maybe seen some of this information previously at COP16. We really, as we promised at COP16 during our side event, we wanted to share this the work that we've been doing with a wider audience, noting that not everybody could make it to a side event, and we wanted just to let you know how we're moving forward with this, and notably, as Centauri said, we want to give an opportunity for people to provide feedback on what we're doing. Next slide, please. So, for background, for those of you that are not familiar with what we've been doing throughout the negotiations of the Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and the package of decisions, including the associated monitoring framework, which was established to help countries monitor implementation at the national level of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Countries indicated again and again the need for support and capacity building and scientific and technical cooperation to assist with the use of the monitoring framework, and indeed to monitor implementation for the purposes of planning implementation, but also review and reporting purposes. So UNEP-WCMC and partners undertook a scoping study on a global knowledge support service for biodiversity. Next slide, please. And in this consultation process, it took a couple of forms. So first of all, we established an informal advisory group in 2022, and that involved members of parties to the CBD, individuals who representatives of delegations, and it involved representatives from national biodiversity institutes and data partners. I would describe them as organizations who are developing and sharing tools and knowledge that can help countries with monitoring implementation of the framework at national level. We also undertook bilateral consultations in 2022 with parties to the CBD, as many as we possibly could. And then at COP15, we ran two side events. One was a roundtable discussion where many parties came and talked about their needs in relation to knowledge for monitoring implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And bear in mind, this was happening in parallel to the discussions on the Global Biodiversity Framework itself. So this was quite a kind of theoretical discussion at times. And then we had a co-design workshop. So once the Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted, we then looked at exactly what a global knowledge service should be. And that draft design, that initial draft design, was shared during the side event, as I mentioned, at CBD COP16. And there's also an information document that we prepared, which I think there's a link to at the end of this presentation. And now, as we move forward, as Charlotte will describe, we'll undertake user consultation, some technical consultation with users, which are targeted around the use of the online portal. And so there'll be an opportunity to provide further feedback during this this time frame. And I should say, you know, we're open to hearing feedback throughout as we produce this service. So although we say yes, we're open to feedback during this quarter, that's really just to help us with this online element, and we're happy to keep revising our model and to make it fit for purpose, really, for parties, our key users, parties to the CBD, that is. Next slide, please. And so just a summary of what we heard from countries when they were talking about their needs in relation to knowledge, information and data related to monitoring implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. First of all, we heard that countries really needed facilitated access. There's a range of different tools and products and information documents out there that can help countries with implementation. But, you know, countries sort of, what they was basically saying is we don't really know which ones to use and how to access some of them. So they wanted this to find some sort of means for facilitating that access. They were also asking for some support with all across the data value chain, essentially, on how we improve digitization of different data tools and products, how we standardize data management, and they asked for greater interoperability between tools. Overall, I think there was this general sort of ask for greater support, capacity building around knowledge management through various different approaches. And we had to think about these requests because, you know, these requests were quite were coming in, and there was quite a lot of requests put to us, and we had to think, well, what's the most what's the kind of the, I'm going to sort of use an English term, which is what's the lowest hanging fruit, or how can we best deal with these requests in a cost-effective manner? And we decided to take a phased approach to doing this. And so if we go to the next slide, we decided to focus around the monitoring framework. And that's because when we undertook a needs assessment from parties on their capacity to use the monitoring framework for the Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we found that many parties, in fact, most parties, said that they didn't have sufficient capacity at the institutional level, the technical level, financially, to use the headline indicators of the monitoring framework. And that's all the way from production of it or interpretation and use for decision making. We also found that there were capacity gaps, as I mentioned, across the data value chain. And because at this point now, countries are starting to think about compiling their 7th national reports reporting to the CBD, and we wanted to help countries with that reporting. So what we wanted to do was try and think about how we might streamline information to help countries with compiling their 7th national reports. Next slide, please. And we put this, and I think it's worth just putting this into context of what we're doing more broadly at UNEP-WCMC through our, I just had a little mental blank there. Through our National Monitoring Support Initiative, we're helping countries, as many as we can, and we're focusing on 10 parties to begin with, to directly work with them to meet their needs in relation to national monitoring and to establish or enhance effective national monitoring systems to help countries with improving their monitoring. And in turn, the reason we're doing this is overall to enhance implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework by improving countries' capacity for monitoring. That in turn, we hope, will help them to revise actions as needed to improve implementation of the framework and MBSAPs. Next slide, please. So the work that we're doing has different elements to it. The first, as I mentioned, is an assessment of national capacity. So we have a look at what's happening at the national level in the countries in which we're working and come up with a tailored plan, a national biodiversity plan for monitoring. And from there, we identify the areas for which we can provide support within the timeframe of the project. This project runs until 2030. Within the timeframe of that, we identify what are the priority areas that we can support with the resources that we have. And that might include establishing peer-to-peer exchange with organizations that are developing tools and resources and that can provide training around the monitoring framework. And that might include both global, but also regional and national organizations. And we should also think about leaving a sustainability plan, because this project isn't going to fix every single problem that countries might have in relation to monitoring. So the idea is to leave behind some sort of sustainability plan with recommendations for how national monitoring can be continued after the project closes. And then what that should lead to is enhanced national capacity for monitoring implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And as I mentioned, hopefully enhanced implementation as a result. Next slide, please. And so when we look at what we're doing, next slide, thank you. And so when we look at what we're doing in relation to national monitoring support, it has these sort of 3 different elements. And one, as I've just outlined, is direct support to countries for as many countries as we can, but we're starting with 10, to build national monitoring systems or enhance them where they already exist. And then there's this other part which might fall under something like a global knowledge support service, connecting up our global network of organizations with parties to directly address their needs. And this online provision, which is on the information that might help countries with monitoring progress at the national level of implementation of the framework. And that might include some of the existing tools and resources, and Charlotte will go through what that might look like. Next slide, please. And I just also wanted to highlight something else that was agreed at CBD COP 15, which was that countries established these regional and sub-regional capacity building centres, or regional or sub-regional technical and scientific support centres, TSCCs. And the role of these centres is to support at the regional level countries' need for capacity building to enhance implementation of the global biodiversity framework at national level. And so when we started working on this global knowledge support service, this decision hadn't been adopted, but now we're having to think about how we might work with the TSCs. Next slide, please. And one of that could be, one of those mechanisms that we're thinking about is how we might work with the TSCs, either connecting them directly with parties through an online service, or us working with the TSCs to find means that for us to meet the needs that are identified by the TSCs. So this is an area that we're still sort of thinking about and trying to think of the most sort of cost-effective and streamlined way for us to do that, subject to the different needs of the different regional entities. Next slide, please. And further context, just to put this into some thinking around the existing activities that are going on. We don't see this global knowledge support service as a sort of unique entity that sort of stands alone, is separate from the existing work, and what we see it complementing the existing activities. So, for example, now that countries have perhaps established their national targets in relation to the global biodiversity framework, and now that they're starting to put in requests for support on national monitoring, we will follow up the work that we did under the GEF7 Early Action Support Project, where we developed some guidance on how countries might develop national monitoring plans. And we're now going to address those national monitoring plans by providing some help and support on developing national monitoring systems. So we see this as part of a sort of cycle of support that countries might need, and how we might help them through this supporting cycle. And the central to this is how countries will access the different types of knowledge that's available to help with monitoring implementation of national strategies and action plans. And that's this knowledge service that we're describing now. Next slide, please. And I described at COP16 the sorts of information that we might share through the knowledge support service. And as I mentioned, we are focused around the monitoring framework. So the sorts of guidance materials that we might make available might be on indicator selection and development, and might be information about the monitoring framework, for example, how to access the metadata, ideally in different languages, all the training resources that might be available to support those headline indicators, the sorts of guidance materials that are available through the partners of the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. Working with the CBD Secretariat, we might make links to the CBD website where there's documents available that are related to monitoring, and that might be made accessible and relevant to the different points in the reporting and review cycle that countries are going through. And as I mentioned as well, through this online part of the service, we'd also might like to see links to various tools and knowledge, for example, the UN Biodiversity Lab, documents and knowledge which are prepared by, for example, FAO and GBIF and others. We might, IPBES are undertaking this monitoring assessment. Those sorts of assessments that are relevant for monitoring might be made accessible and available through this service. So we're still scoping out the contents of this, and in some respects we're waiting to hear the outcomes from the resumed session of CBD COP16 to think about what is the most relevant tools and resources to make available to countries. But essentially at this point, this is the sort of thing we're thinking about, and we'd love to hear from you as we move forward in developing this service as to what is most valuable to parties in helping them with national monitoring. Finally, I'd just like to highlight that, yes, as I mentioned, this summary document, the next slide, please. This summary document that we've prepared for COP16 has an overview on how we're moving forward. So it's a document CBD COP16 information document 40, which is a summary of basically what I've been describing here. And with that, I'll hand back to Santori. Many thanks.
Thanks, Natasha, for the comprehensive overview. Up next, we have Charlotte Field. Charlotte is a lead designer at UNEP-WCMC. She has a passion for functional design solutions, which inspired her to focus her career on user experience and interface, providing decision solutions driven by user testing and interactive research. Charlotte's presentation is going to look at the objectives of the design-based prototype, the process followed to reach the stage, milestones achieved, and the next steps in the process. Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Fiore. Okay, so to help you understand the purpose and goals of the tool, I'll start by outlining the problem we're trying to tackle. So to echo what Natasha's mentioned, so our project goal is to improve access to and use of data and knowledge, both nationally and globally, to help support efforts in monitoring, implementing, and reporting progress towards the GBF. The problem we're trying to aim with this, the problem we're aiming to solve with the tool is right now there are a lot of different tools out and data sets out there for tracking and reporting on the GBF, but users have shared that it can be tough to figure out which tools and data to use for the job at hand. So our goal is to create a support and guidance tool. So ultimately a centralized hub that helps users easily find the right resources for their specific needs. Next slide. Oh, sorry, next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to run through the steps we've taken so far in the design process. So our first step was to generate proto-personas. So the goal of these personas was to gain a clear understanding of some of the challenges users face when carrying out tasks and how the tool can address them. It also helps us to identify any gaps in our knowledge, what we don't know about the users yet, and what we need to understand to make sure we meet their needs. Along with the user personas, we also develop user journeys, which are helpful in predicting how, when, and where the tool might be used. After we kind of created the personas, we then went on, well, our designer, Barbara, went on to put the designs together, and then she developed that into a finalized prototype, which I'm about to show you in a second. We're now currently conducting one-to-one calls, and I'm sure I would have been in contact with a few of you already, to essentially evaluate what we've produced so far. The goal of these calls is to better understand how the tool supports user needs and whether any improvements should be made for the first phase. And we're also using this opportunity to explore how the tool could evolve to better meet the user needs moving forward. So we're focusing on one user type, and the aim is to conduct around 10 interviews. This essentially lets us dive deeper into their feedback and spot any common patterns or issues. And as for next steps, so once we've collated that user feedback, we will then address those. We'll look to address most of them that will affect the first phase and is within scope of the first phase. And then we will also collate the additional feedback that might help influence the tool as it evolves for future iterations. Once we're happy with the designs, we'll then go on to build and essentially make the site live. Next slide. Okay, so what you see on the screen right now is the designed prototype. So it is just the first phase one to start with. So we are calling it a minimal viable product. I'll try and run through it as best I can. Or I think you can press play on the recording there. Perfect. Okay. So the site starts off with 6 signposted boxes, and they'll take you to certain resources relevant to either monitoring, reporting, or implementing. And once you've got to those pages, which you'll probably see in a second, is a list of resources which you can then further filter down. And some of the filters that we've suggested is perhaps looking at certain targets, perhaps years, resource type, languages. Now we're using the user calls, and obviously love to hear feedback as well from the call about how we can better align these pages for user needs. Some of the things that were mentioned about kind of guiding the user further through that process, just to, before you kind of reach a full list of resources. And just to add here, the resources being shown, they're just examples for now, and the list is yet to be, confirmed. Back on the homepage, I'm not sure if the recording will let me, but anyway, I'll go for it anyway. So talking about what Natasha mentioned around the help desk. So we have started kind of that visual sketch, and at the moment, what we've got on the homepage is a contact us section, which encourages the user to get in touch. Maybe there's queries about the tool itself, or maybe there's a question you'd like to ask an expert. Now, we've kept this quite simplified for now. We want to kind of put that idea out there and really gather feedback from users and really understand how the user will access, what sort of questions will be asked, to help evolve and understand what that kind of help desk, we're just using that term for now, to see what that should look like, and evolve to ensure that it definitely meets a user need. And we've also got a news and events section to highlight any call to actions or any progress reports being made. We can kind of lift those to the top. And there is a box around a national section. At the moment, the way it's taken shape is it's very much still a listed page of resources. However, we are looking at ways to evolve that potentially into individual national pages. We've had a few discussions with users that mentioned about potentially being able to see progress from neighboring countries to help influence or guide their reporting or their implementation. So again, very much a concept idea that we're trying to establish what that should look like. So any feedback on that would be great. And on that note, I will pass over to Santhuri to run through any Q&As.
Thanks, Charlotte. That was great. We'd now like to open the floor for a discussion and questions. As we said earlier, your input is going to be shaping the development of this knowledge service. So please provide all your inputs and perspectives. Any issues that will help when you in the development of your national reporting, how you see the service being able to help you in your country.
Sadhuri, I've just put in the chat, somebody asked about a live link or a link that they can have a look at the online designs that Charlotte was just showcasing. And just to let you know that we don't have that link at present because we're still at the developmental stage. But if you'd like to look at the information document, it has an overview of the tool. We will also record these webinars so you can look back at you can look back at what we've shown and maybe slow it down if you want to look at particular parts. Somebody's just asked how they'll access the recordings, and I think that we will make these available via our YouTube channel.
Yes, we will.
Thanks.
There's a question about sharing a little bit more about how you plan on the rollout and the regional languages being supported in the tool. So this will, okay, go ahead, Natasha.
No, you go ahead, please.
So this will be developed as the tool is being developed. More features will be added to it. I'm going to let Natasha give you more information as we go on.
Yeah, I think the languages issue is a bit of a problem for us. So, and it is a problem to accessing different types of knowledge, because some of the knowledge that we're coming across obviously is available in English, and translation comes with a significant cost, but also a significant risk for us, because we need to be able to translate and have the knowledge and skills to make sure that the translations are correct. So this is something we're thinking about, and we'll be working with the CBD Secretariat to think about how we might best do this. And it might be that certain tools and resources are translated into UN languages, and we'll need to prioritise what they are, subject to needs of parties. And there might be some that we would have to ask our partners who are going to be providing these this knowledge and data and information to work on translations. But yeah, I agree, it's a very difficult space for us to we need to think about this and how we're going to make this available. And it is indeed, as you perhaps are indicating, that there is a barrier to uptake of materials that are solely written in certain languages. Thank you.
So there's a question about the 10 countries that are being supported in the current phase. These countries are still being finalized. Currently, we have South Africa, Colombia, Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken, yes, it is. Natasha, do you want to just talk about the rest of the countries that have been finalized for the NMSI?
Yeah, thanks, Sorry, I saw the question from Andy and I was hurriedly trying to get the list of questions. Just bear with me 1 second while I do that, if that's okay. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. I'm just hurriedly trying to get the list of countries. Thanks.
Are there any questions regarding how it's going to help with monitoring, how it's going to help with reporting in your country? How do you see yourself using this tool going forward?
And just, yeah, while you're doing that, so I now have the list of questions. Thanks, Andy, for the list of countries. Thanks, Andy, for the question. So it's Colombia, Ghana, Mexico, South Africa, and Uganda, and one other which is to be agreed. I'll talk about the process in a second for selection. And then we work with countries through regional partners, and some of whom are the regional TSCs that I described before. And this is the ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity, obviously working across the ASEAN region, SPREP in the Pacific region, COMIFAC in the Central African region, and CARICOM in the Caribbean region. And the regional partners are taking very different approaches to how we're working. So some have selected the countries in which they're going to be working in, so they're just working in specific countries in those regions. And some are taking a much more regional approach, so that the tools and resources that we are working with those regional partners will be generic, which are generic to the region and relevant to the region. And here again, there's going to be an issue with translation. So we're going to have to work on how we do that with the TSCs and regional partners. Thank you. I hope that answers the question. And if you've got any follow-up, please do. Oh, I did say I was going to talk about the process for selection. So the process for the selection for this first phase of the 10 countries was based on when we undertook a capacity needs assessment with the CBD Secretariat and the ad hoc technical expert group on indicators. We had a look at the countries that were specifically asking for support. We also listened to the countries in the discussions on the monitoring framework in the lead up to the adoption of the framework at CBD COP15. And we selected countries based on their needs, based on their eligibility of support for financial support, and having a geographical representation, and also a range of different needs. So some of the partners that we're working with have arguably our hiring capacity for monitoring than others. But we wanted to get this range of different needs so that we can enable knowledge sharing between the countries and peer-to-peer support and exchange. So that's how the countries were selected. As we move forward and subject to further funding, we might open a different process for country selection, and we would need to talk to our partners about how we do that. I hope that answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. There's a question from Anand. Let's see. Can you provide more information about data partners and how they can get involved in the support?
Thanks, Anand. That's a great question as well, and nice to hear from you. I think at this point we're still sort of working out which are the best resources to make available. But what we were going to do was distribute a survey to our partners to ask them a couple of questions, really. Firstly, on what are the capacity building activities that are being undertaken by, for example, FSC in this case. Because we don't want to duplicate work that's already happening, but also we want to be able to highlight to countries where there are opportunities for learning with from our partners. And then the other thing we wanted to ask is what are the available tools and resources that are available? So we're very aware of some of our partners have produced training resources and guidance materials, and we'd love just to know which of those that they would like us to share. So we will distribute a survey on that in due course. It's planned for 2025, and that will help us with framing that. And then I think what's made accessible in the tool is subject to demand from parties, and we'll keep reviewing that to make sure that the tools are valuable and useful to parties. And where there are gaps in the knowledge, then we will need to highlight that and address those gaps where we can. And where parties are sort of frequently using knowledge, I think that's a really helpful thing for parties to know what's been working well in one part of the world and why that's worked well, and perhaps to share that information with other countries to let them know what's been an effective tool or an effective resource to help countries. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Speaker has asked about the social networks and technical capacity needed for data collection, data harmonization, and data infrastructures that are resource intense. You already have concepts for providing long-term sustainability. Are there ideas for these data and services to support themselves and reuse of their open data, tools, and science expertise?
I think the short answer to that is no, because we're very much at the initial stages of this project, and we'll be working with the countries to think about what's most appropriate in their national context. And I think it will vary from country to country. So yeah, at this point, I think we don't have that ready to share, but it is a priority as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Natasha, would you be able to give a little bit more information on the help desk platform?
Well, again, this is work in progress. So what we're thinking about is how best to connect parties subject to their needs with organisations who are offering support, guidance, training, etc. on the monitoring framework. So as I mentioned, this is why we're undertaking this survey to our data partners to better understand what it is that they're already doing and perhaps would like to be involved and make accessible through the Global Knowledge Support Service. When we have that, and we also ask some questions about how best they would like to be contacted through such a service, we will develop that, and that is planned for later this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Points for noting? Tanzania is currently not, Natasha's nodding. Tanzania is currently not on the list.
So I should say, Tanzania isn't currently supported under the National Monitoring Support Initiative, but the idea of this Global Knowledge Support Service is to make information accessible to all. So it's not that only the countries that are supported, it's not, maybe we should make that clear, it's not just the 10 countries that are supporting will have access to the knowledge. The idea of this is that there's different nodes of support. Some countries, subject to the funding that we have, are receiving tailored support, and we'd love to widen that to a wider range of countries, and it really just depends on the resources that we have. But the online element of the service and the help desk function that we're developing should make information accessible to a wider range of countries. So it doesn't mean that we'll be able to provide the sort of in-depth capacity building support that we're offering to the 10 countries. But what we want to do is try and make information and knowledge more accessible to all countries to support with national monitoring of implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Thank you. So when you are thinking about developing your country national report to the CBD, the 7th national report, the challenges that you face, how do you see the global knowledge support service supporting you to assist you in those challenges in terms of access to data, in terms of access to knowledge, various platforms? You could even tell us what platforms you're currently using to conduct monitoring and reporting in your countries.
Just while you're thinking about that, Santuri, I've just seen in the chat a question from Cornelia, and she's asking specifically about support to South Africa. Actually, we had quite a few colleagues from South Africa on the call this morning because we did this call twice today. And South Africa is, as I mentioned, a partner that we are working with through the National Monitoring Support Initiative, and our in-country partner there is SAMBI. So the South African National Biodiversity Institute is identifying at present the priority areas in which we will be working with them to build national capacity for monitoring. And if these elements that you're asking here around forest resources restoration and monitoring funding for sustainable development in greenfields sites is part of that, then we'll be addressing it. And if not, then I'm not sure where you're based, but it might be worth just talking to colleagues at SAMBI about those specific needs.
Thanks, Natasha. Maybe you could provide us some information on the platforms you are currently using and the challenges that you are having with these platforms, if any, what you like about them, how it's supporting you in your national monitoring and reporting.
And just while you're thinking of that question, sorry to keep talking, there is another question, which is about the process for selection of tools for monitoring. Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something we've really been thinking about. So as I mentioned, we're going to undertake this survey to partners to find out what tools and knowledge they have available that they think is relevant. And then I think we just need to work with parties to identify which are the tools that are most valuable to them, and we make them all accessible, and we keep this under review to make sure that the tools that we're sharing are valuable and useful. And I think the promotion thing is probably something that we need to think about. And I mentioned this morning and forgot to say here that we'll run a series of online workshops and webinars throughout 2025 for example, to talk about the outcomes from COP 16.2 relating to the monitoring framework, what was adopted, what does the metadata look like. And then we'll also be working with those organizations that are responsible for developing that metadata for the headline indicators, so they can start to show how the indicators are calculated at the national level and what data and knowledge is required in order to do that. And I know that's not necessarily promotion, but in order to do this work, we want to be able to share this information with countries. And we're focusing, as I mentioned, around the monitoring framework in the first instance, because that's what countries have adopted and will be using for their national reporting, and will also be using for national planning purposes. Thanks.
Thanks, Natasha. I think that if there is no further questions, comments, I think that we've done quite well today. And in terms of our way forward, as Natasha and Charlotte have alluded, we will be conducting further user research for a while to get as much information from you. As I said earlier, your knowledge is helping us to develop the service so it works best for you. And that is the process that we are undertaking now to ensure that this knowledge support service is going to work for you and give you all the necessary information, tools, and whatever you require for monitoring and reporting. And that's how we will be moving forward. And on that note, I just want to thank everybody for their participation. I want to thank the speakers, and everybody could have, well, I'm in South Africa at the moment, so it's nighttime. So I'd like to say good night and thank you. And please don't forget to send any questions on the monitoring support email.